The grand corridors of Buckingham Palace were silent, yet the air thrummed with an invisible tension. Polished marble reflected the pale morning light. Gilded frames held centuries of watchful eyes, and every shadow seemed to whisper secrets too delicate to speak aloud. Behind these walls, power and tradition moved like invisible currents, shaping the lives of those who walked here with quiet precision. Camilla's footsteps echoed softly, measured and deliberate, masking the storm simmering beneath her composed exterior. Today, a subtle breach had shaken the palace's delicate balance, an act so quiet, so refined, that only the most vigilant could perceive it. A former royal guard, once trusted by Queen Elizabeth herself, had intervened to protect Kate, shielding her dignity from a slight no one else had noticed. It was a small gesture, almost invisible, yet it carried the weight of centuries, loyalty, honor, and defiance intertwined. Camilla's influence, painstakingly built over years of careful navigation through tradition, felt the quiet tremor of disruption. And in that silence, the palace seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the moment when duty and desire would collide, when private action would ripple into public consequence. Behind the stone walls, a story of allegiance, restraint, and unspoken power was about to unfold. The grand corridors of Buckingham Palace were quiet, yet the silence was weighted with expectation. Polished marble floors reflected the pale morning light, while tapestries, stitched with centuries of history, seemed to watch silently. Every footstep carried a meaning beyond sound, every echo a reminder that here, in these halls, even the smallest gesture was measured, observed, and judged. The palace was alive, not in motion, but in the currents of discipline and protocol that ran invisibly through its veins. Camilla moved with controlled grace, each step deliberate, each glance sharp. Her composure masked a fire of suppressed frustration. Today, the palace had shifted slightly under her feet, a subtle breach, almost imperceptible, yet unmistakable to a mind attuned to influence. A former royal guard, once trusted by Queen Elizabeth herself, had quietly intervened to protect Kate. No announcement, no ceremony, only the quiet assertion of principle. It was an act that preserved honor and dignity, but in doing so, challenged Camilla's carefully cultivated authority. The guard's movements had been precise, unobtrusive, yet they carried the full weight of defiance within the invisible rules of protocol. Kate remained composed, unaware of the quiet storm swirling around her, a serene figure amid a web of tensions invisible to the untrained eye. Each gesture, each calculated position of the guard, spoke of restraint, discipline, and loyalty beyond personal ambition. Camilla's eyes narrowed as she traced the ripple of consequences emanating from this discreet act. Her influence, built over years of careful navigation through centuries of tradition, now met a quiet, steadfast resistance. The palace, though outwardly calm, thrummed with anticipation. Staff moved with subtle caution, aware that loyalty and discretion were being tested, even in the minutiae of daily duties. Every whisper, every glance, every folded note held the weight of centuries of hierarchy, and Camilla felt it pressing against her, insisting she respond with measured force. Sunlight cut through the west wing, glinting off the ceremonial railings and the polished brass of doorknobs. It illuminated the tiniest details, a slightly turned page, a carefully positioned brooch, the faint shimmer of metal pinned with precision. These small markers, usually unnoticed, now carried meaning. They signaled allegiance, hinted at defiance, and revealed fractures in the otherwise seamless choreography of palace life. Camilla's mind cataloged each sign, each imperfection, each subtle hint of challenge, and measured them against her knowledge of human ambition, restraint, and pride. The former guard, pristine in his uniform, moved with the quiet authority of experience. He did not seek recognition, nor did he question the hierarchy. His duty was not merely to obey, but to uphold the moral fabric of the institution he served. And today, in protecting Kate from a slight that could have gone unnoticed by most but not by those attuned to protocol, he exercised that duty with impeccable precision. Every action was considered, every silence deliberate. It was a quiet assertion that loyalty was more than obedience. It was a commitment to principle. By midday, subtle disruptions began to emerge. A misaligned ceremonial order, a delayed response to a request, the faint exchange of glances among aides, all hints that the delicate balance had been disturbed. Camilla cataloged each with the scrutiny of a general surveying a battlefield. The palace was more than stone and gold. It was a living organism, and today it felt a tremor, a single act executed with quiet resolve. Camilla's private reflection revealed the duality of her position. Respect for discipline and loyalty clashed with the desire to assert influence. Her internal calculus weighed the risks and benefits of every potential response. Acting too quickly would reveal impatience, a flaw in her carefully maintained image. Hesitating could allow subtle acts of defiance to grow, eroding control over the network of influence she had meticulously constructed. And all the while, Kate remained the serene nucleus around which this tension spun, her dignity intact, unshaken by the currents swirling around her. Evening fell, and the palace dimmed under the fading sun. Candles flickered along the corridors, casting long shadows across the marble floors. Camilla, standing alone in her private chamber, understood the significance of what had transpired. It was not merely a breach of protocol. It was a collision of principle and ambition, a quiet test of loyalty whose consequences could ripple far beyond these walls. The palace, so often a stage for ceremonial grandeur, had become a crucible where duty, honor, and personal will were measured and weighed. A confidential message, discreetly sealed and quietly delivered, hinted at an incident that had occurred behind closed doors. Its contents were cryptic yet significant, suggesting that the subtle disruption she had witnessed was part of a broader, more consequential narrative. Camilla's eyes lingered on the folded parchment, her mind racing through possibilities and contingencies, knowing that the palace itself demanded a measured response. The stage was set for a confrontation not of brute force, but principle, with a quiet assertion of moral duty would collide with a calculated exercise of influence. The shadow of the day stretched across the halls, touching every chamber, every servant, every ceremonial space. Loyalty and discretion, ambition and restraint, all coexisted in an intricate lattice of expectation and consequence. And in the midst of it, a single act of unseen courage had reshaped the landscape of authority, hinting at conflicts yet to surface and decisions yet to be made. A confidential note, quietly discovered, suggested that the subtle act of defiance was only the beginning. What unfolded next would test the limits of loyalty, challenge the very structures of authority, and reveal the fragile intersection of duty and desire. The palace never truly slept, and by the early hours of the following morning, its corridors already hummed with unseen activity. Servants moved with silent precision, aides whispered behind closed doors, and the echo of polished shoes across marble floors became the quiet soundtrack of anticipation. The incident from the day before, the subtle, almost imperceptible intervention by the former guard, had set the staff on edge. Each footstep, glance, and nod was now laden with suspicion, curiosity, and carefully measured loyalty. Camilla's presence was felt even in her absence. Word of her dissatisfaction, carefully contained yet impossible to suppress, rippled through the staff like a current under ice. Observers noted the slight stiffening of posture, the hesitance in casual conversation, the almost imperceptible shift in alliances. Every aide, every page, every official understood the unspoken truth. Power in Buckingham Palace was not simply exercised. It was sensed, navigated, and maintained through invisible channels of influence. The former guard, whose actions had ignited this quiet turbulence, moved among the staff with practiced discretion. He carried no pride, no overt defiance, only a steady commitment to duty. Yet that very commitment made him a focal point, a point of tension for Camilla, who saw his restraint as a challenge to her authority. Observers noted the contrast. Her measured fury, polished and formal, against a silent, unwavering adherence to principle. It was a collision not of brute force, but of moral gravity. By mid-morning, the palace's intricate protocols were scrutinized with heightened intensity. Historical documents were revisited, honor codes were examined, and centuries-old etiquette guides became instruments in an unfolding investigation. Every ceremonial practice, every procedural nuance, was weighed for evidence of breach or implication. The aides pored over ledgers and diaries, noting shifts in seating arrangements, deviations in routine, and subtle signs of disruption in the chain of command. Nothing escaped scrutiny. Nothing was too small to matter. Camilla convened a quiet assembly of her trusted aides. The room, lined with heavy tapestries and dimmed by the morning light filtering through mullioned windows, carried a charged weight. No words were wasted, each syllable measured, each question precise. The discussion centered on loyalty, hierarchy, and the implications of a single act executed with quiet authority. Was it a deliberate challenge, or merely an adherence to principle? And if the latter, could principle ever truly oppose power without consequence? Outside the chambers, the palace seemed to hold its breath. Footsteps echoed in patterns that suggested observation and caution, and faint glances exchanged in hallways hinted at shifting allegiances. The former guard, moving through this lattice of subtle power dynamics, remained composed. He engaged neither in gossip nor in strategic positioning. His role was to act as the embodiment of principle, to safeguard honor, and to execute duty with quiet exactitude. And yet, in doing so, he became the axis upon which the palace's delicate moral balance began to tilt. By afternoon, minor breaches of protocol began to surface. A misplaced note here, a delayed report there, a whispered observation among aides, all pointed to a tension that could no longer be contained. Camilla's frustration intensified, yet was laced with reluctant acknowledgement. The guard's discipline was not flawed. It was impeccable. Every subtle motion, every carefully measured choice had been executed with mastery that even she could respect. And yet respect did not diminish the threat to her influence. As the investigation deepened, historical precedent became both shield and lens. Documents from decades past, detailing ceremonial duties and the consequences of deviation, were scrutinized. Cases of minor insubordination, overlooked yet meticulously recorded, were compared to the current situation. Observers drew parallels, noting that the preservation of dignity often required bending, but never breaking, the invisible chains of protocol. Every precedent reinforced a single truth. In Buckingham Palace, principle and procedure were inseparable, and any disruption, however subtle, demanded careful adjudication. Meanwhile, Kate moved through the day as if unaware of the currents swirling around her. Her composure remained untouched, her grace unaltered. Yet the events of the past hours had begun to ripple outward, influencing every corner of the palace. Her presence was stabilizing, a quiet counterpoint to Camilla's internal storm. Those who watched closely saw the contrast. Fury measuring control versus serenity and dignity, preserved under pressure. It was a lesson in restraint, one that would resonate far beyond the immediate conflict. Evening brought with it a faint tension, subtle yet persistent. A minor breach, a late-night message sent in haste, a meeting convened without full notice, hinted at a coming confrontation. Staff sensed that the lattice of duty and loyalty was under pressure, and that the careful equilibrium maintained for centuries might soon be challenged. Camilla, seated in her private chambers, reviewed the day's developments with a meticulous eye. Her thoughts were precise, her strategies deliberate, yet beneath it all lay a restless current. The challenge to authority had been quiet, but undeniable. The former guard, in contrast, moved with the quiet composure of a man who understood both the rules and their moral purpose. Every action, every decision, was measured not by ambition, but by principle. In a palace where influence often spoke louder than action, his restraint spoke volumes. Allies and observers noted it, some with admiration, others with irritation. Camilla's frustration deepened as the quiet authority of one man threatened to reshape perceptions and challenge established hierarchies. The night settled over Buckingham Palace, yet the tension did not fade. Whispers continued in hushed corridors, eyes lingered on every gesture, and the invisible currents of loyalty and protocol remained taut. The palace itself seemed to respond, shadows stretching along hallways, tapestries fluttering with the faintest draft, and candles flickering as if aware of the drama unfolding within. Every observer, every participant, understood that the days ahead would require careful navigation, where principle, loyalty, and ambition would collide in ways both subtle and decisive. By the early hours, the stage was set for what could no longer be contained. A minor breach, amplified by observation and principle, had revealed a fault line beneath the palace's polished surface. The former guard remained steadfast, unwavering in duty, yet his quiet assertion had awakened currents of suspicion and ambition that would not easily be silenced. Camilla, aware of the implications, understood that the next step would demand a confrontation of subtlety and precision, where every word and gesture carried moral and institutional weight. A single, unauthorized communication surfaced in the dead of night, hinting at alliances forming, loyalties tested, and secrets edging toward revelation. What followed next would push the palace's invisible chains to their limit and set the stage for the collision of loyalties that could not be ignored. The palace had grown restless. Every corridor, every gallery, every stairwell seemed to hum with an unseen tension, a taut wire stretched between restraint and ambition. The subtle disturbances of the previous days had ripened into questions that demanded answers, and in Buckingham Palace, questions were never simple. The corridors were silent, but the weight of loyalty and dissent pressed heavily, settling into corners like dust that could not be ignored. Camilla moved through the West Wing with purpose. Her composure, flawless as ever, concealed the turmoil beneath. Every aide she passed offered measured respect, but behind the polite nods, she sensed scrutiny. The former guard's quiet assertion of principle had shifted the balance of influence, and the very walls of the palace seemed to acknowledge it. Her steps faltered only once, in the antechamber, where a misplaced ceremonial document reminded her that even the smallest oversight could become a weapon in the subtle wars of authority. The guard was waiting, not openly, not provocatively, but in the quiet shadow of the corridor, a figure of disciplined restraint. His presence alone challenged Camilla's carefully managed equilibrium. She approached with controlled precision, every movement deliberate, as though each gesture were part of an unspoken code of confrontation. His eyes met hers briefly, unwavering calm, yet filled with an unspoken conviction. Words were unnecessary. The collision of wills was already underway. Camilla spoke first, her voice smooth, formal, yet edged with restrained fury. "I understand your commitment to protocol," she said, each syllable measured. "But there are boundaries that must not be tested, even in the name of principle." The guard did not flinch. "Boundaries exist to preserve dignity," he replied evenly, "not to shield personal ambition. My actions protect the institution, not my position within it." The exchange, though restrained, reverberated through the palace. Staff who observed from afar felt the tension in their bones. Loyalty, once unquestioned, was now a terrain of moral uncertainty. Allies shifted subtly, weighing allegiance against principle, ambition against honor. Kate, ever composed, moved quietly through the background, her presence stabilizing yet magnifying the stakes. She was a living measure of dignity under pressure, her silence a counterpoint to the charged confrontation unfolding. Camilla's anger, internalized yet unmistakable, reflected a deeper struggle, the conflict between public image and private desire for control. Every word, every glance, was a negotiation of power, morality, and consequence. The guard, unwavering, represented the other axis of this collision, duty, principle, and honor above all else. Around them, the palace seemed to constrict, the ceilings lower, the tapestries darker, as though the walls themselves understood the moral magnitude of the moment. Hours later, palace records were unearthed in quiet consultation. Old journals, logs, and confidential letters revealed histories that few had known existed. One document, in particular, caught attention. A record of minor ceremonial infraction decades prior, resolved with discretion yet bearing lessons of restraint and moral clarity. The revelation reshaped the perception of past events, casting both Camilla's influence and the guard's actions in a new light. Here, loyalty was no longer merely compliance. It was a subtle choice between expediency and principle. The conversation between Camilla and the guard escalated through subtleties rather than volume. A raised eyebrow, a carefully timed pause, a shift in stance. Each became a form of dialogue as potent as words. The tension was not dramatic in the conventional sense. It was moral, intellectual, and deeply personal. Those who witnessed it understood that the stakes were not reputation alone, but the very essence of trust and authority within the palace. Kate's quiet observation added another layer of complexity. She neither intervened nor commented, yet her measured presence became the stabilizing force amidst shifting loyalties. Her dignity highlighted the contrast between Camilla's drive for control and the guard's devotion to principle. Every gesture, every subtle glance, every pause carried meaning. The palace, in essence, became a theater of moral decision-making, and each actor was aware that even the smallest misstep could have far-reaching consequences. The evening brought further complication. A confidential letter, left unintentionally exposed on a desk, suggested that not all staff were aligned with either Camilla or the guard. New allegiances quietly formed, whispers traveled unseen, and the palace's internal hierarchy began to stretch under pressure. Those who had once remained neutral were now forced to choose, and each choice carried consequences that could reshape the invisible architecture of loyalty. By late night, the moral calculus reached its peak. Camilla retreated to her private chambers, reviewing every move, every alignment, every subtle sign of influence. Her fury, though contained, was sharpened by awareness. The guard's quiet competence had shifted the balance. Yet, as always, her mind sought control, searching for a way to reassert influence without violating the moral and procedural framework that defined palace life. The guard, in contrast, prepared for the following day with disciplined calm. His decisions were guided not by desire or ambition, but by principle. Every action, every interaction, every subtle gesture was a reinforcement of duty. His loyalty to Kate, to the institution, and to the unspoken codes of the palace hierarchy had placed him in opposition to Camilla's authority. Yet his conscience remained clear. He understood the stakes, and he embraced the quiet responsibility that came with them. Morning arrived with the faintest hint of tension still lingering in the air. The corridors, though empty of foot traffic, were alive with anticipation. Every aide, every servant, every observer sensed that the collision of loyalties was not yet resolved. The palace, with all its history, grandeur, and ceremony, had become a crucible of moral decision-making, where restraint and principle could outweigh influence and ambition, and where a single act of quiet courage could shift the course of events. By mid-morning, the confrontation reached an unforeseen turning point. Records discovered in the archives revealed a previously hidden connection between past breaches of protocol and the current incident. A truth emerged that reshaped allegiances, revealed long-standing resentments, and illuminated motives that have been obscured by decades of silence. The revelation forced all parties to confront not only each other, but their own values, priorities, and the delicate interplay between loyalty, ambition, and honor. In the chambers where these revelations unfolded, the tension was both visible and invisible. Camilla wrestled with her pride and her desire for control. The guard maintained his calm, unshaken by provocation, guided by principle. Kate remained composed, a living measure of dignity. Around them, the palace seemed to hold its breath, aware that the equilibrium of centuries rested on decisions that were now unavoidable. As the day drew to a close, the moral stakes crystallized. A choice awaited: loyalty to protocol or loyalty to self-interest, adherence to principle or pursuit of influence. The subtle, invisible threads of allegiance and authority had been pulled taut, and the moment of resolution hung suspended. Every observer, every participant, every shadow in the palace seemed to anticipate the outcome, knowing that whichever path was chosen would reshape the moral and hierarchical landscape of Buckingham Palace for years to come. The choices made in the hours ahead would divide loyalties, test the limits of principle, and force decisions that could not be undone. In the quiet of the night, the palace awaited the revelation that would set the course for confrontation, truth, and moral reckoning. The palace had grown quieter, but the silence was heavier, laden with the weight of unspoken truths. In corridors that had once echoed only with ceremony, whispers now lingered like shadows, seeping into the corners of rooms where secrets had always slept. Camilla moved deliberately through the West Wing, each step measured, each breath calculated, aware that every surface, every artifact, carried a memory of centuries. The palace itself seemed to watch, holding these walls in patient anticipation of revelation. Earlier confrontations had set a tremor in motion, subtle but profound. Staff, aides, and attendants moved with caution, uncertain where their loyalties might be tested next. The former guard remained steadfast, his calm a quiet defiance to the currents of ambition swirling around him. It was his calm, more than words or actions, that forced acknowledgement. He had acted in accordance with duty, principle, and honor, and in doing so, he had illuminated a truth Camilla could neither ignore nor fully accept. The first discovery came in the form of letters long tucked away in forgotten drawers of the palace archives. Their edges were yellowed, ink faded, yet the content carried resonance. Confessions, promises, and hidden agreements that had remained secret for decades. Each letter revealed threads of loyalty and betrayal, decisions made quietly to protect dignity, even at personal cost. One particular letter, written in careful, deliberate handwriting, spoke of a breach of protocol decades earlier, resolved without scandal, but noted meticulously in palace records. It was a reminder that even the smallest act, if executed with discretion, could preserve honor and shape history. Camilla read the documents with growing unease. Every revelation chipped away at her certainty, exposing the fragility of influence when weighed against principle. The letters revealed alliances hidden in plain sight, moments of courage overlooked, and the quiet resilience of those who had chosen loyalty over ambition. Her anger, once focused outward, began to turn inward, reflecting the tension between desire for control and the reality of moral constraint. Meanwhile, the former guard continued his routine, each interaction deliberate, each decision guided by principle rather than expediency. Observers noted the contrast between his unshakable composure and Camilla's simmering frustration. In a palace where influence had often spoken louder than action, the guard's restraint was a force in itself. Every subtle motion, every gesture of measured calm, reminded all present that loyalty was not merely a matter of obedience, but of conscience. Kate's presence, constant yet understated, served as a stabilizing axis. Her dignity was quiet, her strength measured. She did not intervene in the unfolding examination of secrets, yet her mere presence underscored the stakes. Staff and aides, attuned to nuance, observed that in her steadiness lay authority that transcended hierarchy. While Camilla sought to assert control, Kate's calmness preserved equilibrium, revealing the power of quiet influence over overt ambition. As the day unfolded, palace logs and archival records began to yield more than mere documentation. Hidden annotations, subtle references, and overlooked details painted a broader picture of institutional memory and ethical complexity. Conflicts long buried, promises forgotten, and minor breaches previously contained now intersected with the present, revealing patterns of loyalty, betrayal, and moral courage. Each discovery added layers of understanding, and with each layer, the palace seemed to exhale, acknowledging the inevitability of confrontation with the truths it had long concealed. The emotional midpoint arrived as Camilla realized that some of her assumptions had been false. Her authority, while formidable, was not absolute. Her influence could not override principle without consequence, and even her carefully cultivated networks of power were vulnerable to the subtle assertion of moral courage. Frustration became introspection. Anger softened into reluctant respect, and the collision between personal desire and institutional ethics reached its deepest resonance. By evening, a series of journals was brought to light, confidential accounts of service within the palace spanning decades. They chronicled acts of discretion, choices made to preserve dignity, and moments where loyalty had been tested in ways that demanded courage without recognition. One entry in particular described an event remarkably similar to the current situation, a minor act of intervention that preserved honor, avoided scandal, and yet subtly shifted the internal balance of power. The parallels were undeniable, forcing those present to confront the timeless interplay between duty and ambition. Camilla's reflection deepened as she considered the implications. Every decision, every act of restraint, carried moral and institutional weight. Power without principle was fleeting. Principle without recognition could be quietly transformative. She understood that the guard's actions, though challenging to her influence, were consistent with moral compass that the palace itself had long revered. And in that realization, a quiet shift occurred, one that acknowledged the guard's integrity, even while leaving her pride unresolved. The palace's atmosphere shifted with the accumulation of revealed secrets. Shadows lengthened in candlelit chambers, the weight of history pressing against every surface. Footsteps that had previously moved with casual precision now carried the gravity of awareness. Observers sensed that the quiet unfolding of truth was more consequential than any overt confrontation. The balance of power was no longer measured solely by protocol or influence, but by adherence to principle, the courage to act discreetly, and the patience to withstand scrutiny without compromise. Nightfall brought a stillness that was almost reverent. Camilla remained in contemplation. The letters and journals spread before her like a map of human morality, ambition, and restraint. The former guard, unwavering, prepared for the next day with the same measured precision that had defined him from the start. Kate's quiet presence maintained equilibrium, her dignity a silent testament to the enduring power of restraint. In the shadows of the palace, unspoken questions lingered. How far could influence extend without principle to guide it? Could authority be reconciled with morality, ambition with loyalty? And what cause would emerge for those who acted decisively in the quiet, unseen corners of duty? Every revelation brought clarity, yet each answer only led to deeper moral and emotional complexities. A decisive act, long hidden from public and private memory, was poised to surface. It would force Camilla, the guard, and all who served within the palace walls to confront truths that could not be undone. The choices made in the coming hours would leave no room for retreat, setting the stage for the final reckoning of loyalty, honor, and conscience. The palace breathed with a slow, deliberate rhythm, as if the weight of recent revelations had finally begun to settle. Corridors that had once hummed with tension now carried the muted echoes of careful footsteps. Servants moved with precision, aides exchanged nods with subtle relief, and the ceremonial halls regained a sense of ritual calm. Buckingham Palace, enduring and unwavering, had survived the quiet turbulence, its walls steeped in history, its floors bearing the silent memory of loyalty tested. Camilla's presence was tempered now. Her movements remained poised, elegant, but the tension that had marked the past days had softened into reflective resolve. The confrontation with the former guard and the uncovering of hidden truths had left her with a grudging acknowledgement. Power, though wielded with authority, could not disregard principle without consequence. She understood as never before that influence alone was insufficient. Respect for duty and honor was the true currency of authority within these walls. The former guard, steadfast as ever, continued his silent vigilance. His actions had restored not only dignity to Kate, but balance to the palace itself. Where previously the threads of protocol had been strained, they now realigned, reinforced by his unwavering adherence to principle. Staff who had been uncertain, who had questioned allegiances, now found clarity in his example. Quietly and visibly, he had demonstrated that duty could transcend ambition, and that honor could guide even the most complex moral landscape. Kate's presence, constant and stabilizing, remained a touchstone of composure and dignity. She moved through the halls as if the turbulence had never touched her, yet her steadiness radiated a subtle influence. Observers noted the contrast. Camilla's tempered assertiveness, the guard's disciplined restraint, and Kate's serene authority together formed a new equilibrium. Each had played a role, each had been tested, and together they restored the palace's intricate moral and hierarchical balance. Ceremonial routines resumed their former rhythm, yet with an undercurrent of awareness. Every gesture, every step, every place in the staff carried the quiet imprint of lessons learned. Minor details, the alignment of the guard during review, the careful arrangement of ceremonial regalia, the measured timing of arrivals and departures, spoke of an institution that had endured disruption yet emerged reinforced. Here, subtlety was power, restraint was strength, and principle was a foundation upon which order rested. Camilla reflected privately on the events. Her frustration, once acute, had softened into understanding. She recognized that the guard's loyalty and adherence to principle had not diminished her role, but had in fact clarified the boundaries within which influence could operate. The palace, she realized, demanded a delicate balance. Authority exercised with awareness, ambition tempered by conscience, and power guided by the immutable framework of duty. In this, she found not defeat, but insight, a deeper comprehension of the responsibilities and limitations inherent in her position. The former guard, while never seeking acknowledgement, received quiet respect from those who observed his conduct. His intervention, though subtle, had reaffirmed the palace's moral and institutional order. Staff now moved with renewed confidence, aware that their duties were guided not only by hierarchy, but by a consistent standard of honor. The lessons of restraint, principle, and discreet action would ripple through the palace for months to come, shaping behavior and decisions in ways that few outside these walls would ever witness. Kate, central yet unobtrusive, served as the enduring measure of dignity preserved. Her calmness had anchored the turbulence of the past days, her composure a quiet testament to the power of restraint. In her, the palace saw the embodiment of grace under pressure, a reminder that true authority often resided not in overt assertion, but in the quiet assurance of ethical constancy. Those who observed her recognized that her influence, though subtle, was enduring, guiding both formal protocol and the moral compass of those around her. By late afternoon, a sense of equilibrium had returned. Decisions were made, roles clarified, and subtle tensions resolved. Camilla, the former guard, and Kate each understood their respective positions within the palace hierarchy and the moral architecture that sustained it. Authority, duty, and principle, once tested, had now reaffirmed their order, and the palace itself seemed to exhale, the strain of uncertainty replaced by the steady cadence of tradition upheld. In the private chambers, Camilla allowed herself a moment of reflection. The confrontation and its aftermath had been instructive, revealing the limits of influence and the enduring weight of principle. The palace's continuity had been preserved, not through coercion or display, but through adherence to the unseen codes of honor and moral discretion. Here, power and conscience were reconciled, and a subtle equilibrium of authority restored. The evening settled over Buckingham Palace with a quiet dignity. Candlelight flickered across polished surfaces, casting soft shadows on tapestries and marble floors. Staff moved with composed efficiency. Ceremonies resumed their measured rhythm, and the palace, as always, stood as a monument to the endurance of history, protocol, and the quiet moral courage of those who served within it. The lessons of recent days have been profound. Loyalty executed with restraint, courage expressed through discreet action, and principle upheld even when tested by ambition. The palace, resilient and eternal, had witnessed these truths unfold, and in doing so, had reaffirmed the values that sustained its legacy. Camilla, the former guard, and Kate each recognized that their roles were bound not by ego, but by the immutable obligations of duty, honor, and conscience. As night deepened, a serene reflection settled over the palace. The echoes of recent trials lingered quietly, hinting at the enduring weight of history and the subtle sacrifices made in its service. The final chapter would contemplate legacy, silence, and the quiet power of principled action behind the grandeur of Buckingham Palace. The palace, bathed in the soft glow of early morning light, carried a serenity that seemed almost eternal. Corridors once thick with tension were now quiet, their polished floors reflecting centuries of history and duty. In every room, in every shadow, the echoes of recent turbulence had faded, leaving behind only the subtle imprint of lessons learned and choices made with care. Buckingham Palace, resilient as ever, had absorbed the disturbances of human ambition and quiet courage alike, standing as a testament to the endurance of principle. Camilla moved through the halls with deliberate calm. Her earlier frustration had softened into reflection, the fire of ambition tempered by understanding. She recognized that power, though commanding, must operate in harmony with conscience. Influence without regard for principle was fleeting. Authority without moral compass was hollow. The events of recent days had clarified not only her place within the palace hierarchy, but the true nature of respect and loyalty. Even in the private confines of her chambers, she felt the weight of restraint as both challenge and lesson, a reminder that legacy was built not through dominance but through measured action. The former guard continued his quiet vigilance, though the strain of confrontation had passed. His loyalty, unwavering and discreet, had preserved not only the dignity of those he protected, but the integrity of the institution itself. Actions taken without fanfare, carried out in accordance with principle rather than desire for recognition, had reaffirmed the subtle yet enduring power of quiet courage. Observers, attuned to nuance, understood that it was his steadfast adherence to duty that ensured the palace remained a place of order, respect, and moral clarity. Kate moved gracefully through the day, her composure unshaken, her presence a stabilizing force. She embodied dignity, not as spectacle, but as quiet influence, a reminder that true authority could be exercised through calm and principled action. Staff and aides, now returning to routine, watched her with quiet admiration, understanding that leadership was as much about moral example as it was about formal rank or ceremonial command. Her steadiness reminded all who served that legacy was preserved in restraint, courage, and ethical consistency, often unnoticed, yet profoundly influential. As the palace settled fully into the rhythm of daily life, The lessons of recent events became embedded in the consciousness of those who walked its halls. The subtle interplay of ambition, principle, and loyalty had been revealed and tested. The consequences of every discrete action, every careful choice, were now known, and the institution had emerged stronger for it. Observers understood that the quiet preservation of honor, the unobtrusive exercise of conscience, and the measured resolution of conflict were the true foundations of enduring legacy. Evening fell over Buckingham Palace, and with it, a reflective hush. Candlelight flickered across gilded surfaces, illuminating artifacts that had witnessed centuries of history, diplomacy, and discretion. Each item, from ceremonial regalia to ancient manuscripts, carried reminders of sacrifices made in silence, of actions undertaken not for recognition, but for preservation. The palace itself seemed to hold its breath, reverent of the quiet courage that had shaped events, and aware that true legacy was often invisible, measured in principle rather than spectacle. Camilla, in her private study, considered the journey of recent days. Pride and ambition had collided with restraint and duty, yet the outcome was neither defeat nor triumph in the conventional sense. It was understanding, tempered by acknowledgement of the broader moral landscape. Influence was real, but principle endured longer, shaping not only immediate consequences but the fabric of institutional memory. She understood that respect, loyalty, and honor could not be claimed, only demonstrated through measured, deliberate action. The former guard, though never seeking acknowledgement, had left a permanent imprint on the palace's moral structure. His quiet courage, adherence to duty, and preservation of dignity had reinforced the unseen frameworks that sustain authority. Every observer, every aide, every participant carried with them the lessons of restraint, ethical constancy, and moral courage. Actions taken in silence, without acclaim or spectacle, had shaped events more profoundly than any overt display of power could have. Kate's role, steady and unassuming, underscored the lasting impact of dignity under pressure. Her influence, subtle yet undeniable, had guided choices, stabilized tensions, and reinforced the palace's moral and hierarchical equilibrium. The harmony she fostered was not enforced, but felt, an invisible guide for those who observed, learned, and served. The palace, in her presence, became more than stone, gold, and ritual. It became a living testament to principle, patience, and moral clarity. As night deepened, the palace exhaled. The lessons of loyalty, courage, and discretion had been learned, internalized, and preserved. Influence had been tested, ambition tempered, and principle upheld. Buckingham Palace, eternal in its grandeur and resilient in its discipline, stood as it always had, witness to the choices of those who serve, protect, and uphold its legacy. The final reflection was clear. True legacy is neither public nor ostentatious. It is crafted in silence, measured in restraint, and sustained by adherence to conscience. Acts of courage, honor, and moral clarity, even when unseen, leave traces that endure across time. Within these walls, the quiet sacrifices of those who serve the crown are remembered not in ceremony, but in the subtle maintenance of principle, dignity, and the enduring weight of history. In the hush of night, the palace seemed to whisper its eternal question. Between duty and desire, between influence and conscience, which guides a true legacy of those who serve, the answer, carried silently through corridors and chambers, lingers still, awaiting each new generation entrusted with the crown.